We have a really serious situation of authoritarianism that ties into suppression of speech, actual suppression of speech. It possibly ties into the plan to steal this election in November by Donald Trump. And what's happening is that paramilitary federal law enforcement officers have been dispatched to Portland, Oregon. They're grabbing people, including protesters, not just looters. They're taking them away in unmarked vehicles. They don't have badges. And this has been confirmed by the Department of Homeland Security. This is really actually serious. These paramilitaries are driving around in unmarked cars, wearing camouflage really more appropriate for the desert than downtown Portland, Oregon. Protesters are being detained even in the absence of evidence that any crime was committed. And this is an authoritarian type show of force. The claim from the Department of Homeland Security is that these troops, which really is what they are being sent to Portland to keep the peace and to protect federal property. The stories we're hearing are that people are being grabbed, thrown in unmarked vans, taken to undisclosed locations, not being accused of any crime in many cases, some are, and in most cases, they are being released. Some are charged with crimes. Some of the people being detained are not even near federal property, which is supposedly the reason these federal troops are there in the first place. And many aren't being told why they are being detained. They are just protesters protected by the First Amendment. The mayor of Portland, Ted Wheeler, says he didn't ask for help. He has asked the federal troops to leave, and yet there they are. So that's story number one, what is actually happening on the ground, and we're still getting more information about what's happening there. The second story is that this is potentially a test of what may happen in many cities starting as soon as this week to repress protests. Charlie Pierce has a good piece about this in Esquire, where he points out when Trump tries something and gets away with it, he does more of it. And Pierce is suggesting maybe this is a dry run for what Trump was threatening at the start of the George Floyd protests a couple of months ago, major deployments of militarized law enforcement or even straight up military to urban areas. So there's two sub-stories to that second story. Number one is the authoritarianism spreading to repress protests. The second part is actually trying to cause confrontations, the troops, that is, in order to benefit Trump politically by pointing to violent protesters, which they will induce to violence. We've already seen reports that the protests themselves are seeing more unrest in Portland since the deployment of the troops. So there's the authoritarianism, but there's also the deployment of troops to create unrest, to then point to, look at all these violent people, we need a bigger show of force. Which gets us to the third piece of this, which is these authoritarian forces being sent into cities now could be a trial balloon for sending or keeping them in cities in November for the purpose of intimidating around the election. And that would be like the closure of the loop in terms of what's going on. That strategy requires some foresight, which Trump does not seem able to do. But William Barr certainly would be capable of that, and some of the others involved may well be. Now, in terms of legality, of course, Trump's Justice Department and DHS say this is legal. The ACLU and other lawyers have said, you know, this could arguably be kidnapping and abduction, right? I mean, you've got paramilitaries without badges and camo in unmarked cars, grabbing people, taking them away, often not telling them what crime they're suspected of committing, and eventually releasing them without having charged them of any crime. It is going in the direction of a secret police sort of thing. Now, to take a brief detour, this is important as an opportunity to prepare you for some bad arguments from the right about this. Right-wing darling Ben Shapiro tweeted in response to some of what we're seeing in Portland, quote, "Fascism is not federal law enforcement enforcing the law against rioters and looters, and they are arresting rioters and looters in Portland, not mere protesters. Fascism is the Chinese government shuttling Uyghurs by train to concentration camps." Well, he's right that certainly is fascistic, what's going on in China, and everybody should be calling it out, and most people are. But there's a petri dish of nonsense here. It's almost like a one-sentence gish gallop because a lot of stuff is being mixed up. It is true that law enforcement arresting criminals is not fascism. That's completely true. That's not actually what's at issue here. What we have here are countless videos of mere protesters being brutally repressed, who have not looted, who have not rioted. We have law enforcement in unmarked cars popping out in a city in camo that does not match the urban setting in which they're operating, wearing desert camo without badges. That is deliberate intimidation. That's starting to border on some of the stuff you see in authoritarian and totalitarian states. And to top it off, there are reports coming in of people being taken off to undisclosed locations, not being given due process, just being held and ultimately released. So don't fall for law enforcement doing law enforcement work isn't fascism. No, it's not. That's not what this is about. This is about camouflaged military in unmarked vehicles sent in to repress protests, possibly as a trial balloon for intimidation to happen nationally as we approach Election Day. We almost have a situation where Portland police officers should be protecting protesters from the guys with no badges in the unmarked vans. That's how crazy it is. Don't we have a right to know who is policing us? Aren't combatants, as insane as that word is, required to indicate who they are and who they work for? Anonymous police in camo with no badges is what's going on right now. This could just as easily be some right-wing militia as it could be a prison riot squad being repurposed. And in fact, how long will it be until some right-wing militia that looks just like these guys kidnaps and kills someone and it gets swept under the rug? The city should file a lawsuit and put it in the hands of the courts. I'd be lying if I said I knew how the courts would rule on what's going on. This is still developing. We will have more upcoming. If you are anything like me, you probably aren't thrilled with the idea of going into a doctor's office right now. And thankfully, there's a practical and affordable way to take control of your health and get personalized care from the comfort of your home. It's a service called SteadyMD. They're one of our sponsors. You take a quiz, you get matched with a licensed primary care physician who understands your health needs. You have a 1-hour video call with your new doctor. You establish a meaningful relationship with them. And after that, your doctor is available to you anytime by text, phone, or video chat. This is not a random doctor on call. Each doctor at SteadyMD has a limited number of patients, so they actually have time to listen to you. You get the personal attention that you deserve. They can do almost everything an in-person doctor can do: perform medical evaluations, talk to you about health concerns, send prescriptions to your home or local pharmacy, and anything they can't do online, they'll quickly set you up with an in-person provider to do, things like blood tests, as an example. You don't need insurance. It's only $99 a month with no other fees or copays. There are so many practical advantages to using SteadyMD for primary care, and it's also so much more affordable. Go to steadymd.com/Pakman to take the free quiz, see which doctor is right for you. I took their quiz. They matched me with a doctor who specializes in my particular health needs and situation. The doctor they gave me is a really perfect fit for me and my medical needs. There's no risk, no commitment to get started. Just click the link right underneath this video.